Welcome back. We're going to continue with Aesop's Fables with the Goatherd and the Wild Goats. One cold, stormy day, a goatherd drove his goats for shelter into a cave, where a number of wild goats had also found their way. The shepherd wanted to make the wild goats part of his flock, so he fed them well. But his own flock, he gave only just enough food to keep them alive. When the weather cleared, the shepherd led the goats out of feed. The wild goats scampered off to the hills. "Is that the thanks I get for feeding you and treating you so well?" complained the shepherd. "Do not expect us to join your flock," replied one of the wild goats. "We know how you would treat us later on if some strangers should come as we did." The moral of this story is, it is unwise to treat old friends badly for the sake of new ones. The Spendthrift and the Swallow. A young fellow who was very popular among his boon companions as a good spender quickly wasted his fortune trying to live up to his reputation. Then, one fine day in early spring, he found himself with not a penny left and no property to save the clothes he wore. He was to meet some jolly young men that morning, and he was at his wits' end how to get enough money to keep up appearances. Just then a swallow flew by, twittering merrily, and the young man, thinking summer had come, hastened off to a clothes dealer, whom he sold all the clothes he wore down to his very tunic. A few days later, a change in the weather brought a severe frost, and the poor swallow and that foolish young man in his light tunic and with his arms and knees bare could scarcely keep alive in their shivering bodies. The moral is, one swallow does not make a summer. The Cat and the Birds. A cat was growing very thin. As you have guessed, he did not get enough to eat. One day he heard that some birds in the neighborhood were ailing and needed a doctor, so he put on a pair of spectacles and with a leather box in his hand, knocked on the door of the birds' home. The birds peeped out, and Dr. Cat, with much solicitude, asked how they were. He would be very happy to give them some medicine. "Tweet, tweet," laughed the birds. "Very smart, aren't you?" "We are very well, thank you, and more so if only you keep away from here." The moral being, be wise and shun the quack. The Dog and the Oyster. There was once a dog who was very fond of eggs. He visited the hen house very often, and at last got so greedy that he would swallow the eggs whole. One day the dog wandered down to the seashore. There he spied an oyster. In a twinkling the oyster was resting in the dog's stomach, shell and all. It pained the dog a good deal, as you could guess. "I've learned that all round things are not eggs," he said, groaning. The moral of this story is, act in haste and repent at leisure, and often in pain. The next story is called The Astrologer. A man who lived a long time ago believed that he could read the future in the stars. He called himself an astrologer and spent his time at night gazing at the sky. One evening he was walking along the open road outside the village. His eyes were fixed on the stars. He thought he saw that the end of the world was at hand. Then, all at once, down he went into a hole full of mud and water. There he stood up to his ears in muddy water and madly clawing at the slippery sides of the hole in an effort to climb out. His cries for help soon brought the villagers running. As they pulled him out of the mud, one of them said, "You pretend to read the future in the stars, and yet you fail to see what is at your feet. This may teach you to pay more attention to what is right in front of you and let the future take care of itself." "What use is it," said another, "to read the stars when you can't see what's right here on earth?" The moral of this story is, take care of the little things and the big things will take care of themselves. 3 Bullocks and a Lion. A lion had been watching 3 bullocks feeding in an open field. He He had tried to attack them several times, but they had kept together and helped each other drive him off. The lion had little hope of eating them, for he was no match for 3 strong bullocks with their sharp horns and hooves. But he could not keep away from that field, for it was hard to resist watching a good meal even when there was little chance of getting it. Then one day the bullocks had a quarrel, and the hungry lion came out to look at them and lick his chops as he was accustomed to do. He found them in separate corners of the field, as far away from one another as they could get. It was now an easy matter for the lion to attack them one at a time, and thus he proceeded to do with the greatest satisfaction and relish. The moral of this story is, unity is strength. Mercury and the Woodsman. A poor woodsman was cutting down a tree near the edge of a deep pool in the forest. It was late in the day, and the woodsman was tired. He had been working since sunrise, and his strokes were not as sure as they had been early that morning. Thus it happened that the axe slipped and flew out of his hand into the pool. The woodsman was in despair. The axe was all he possessed with which he could make a living, and he had not money enough to buy a new one. As he stood wringing his hands and weeping, the god Mercury suddenly appeared and asked what the trouble was. The woodsman told what would happen, and straightway the kind Mercury dived into the pool. When he came up again, he held a wonderful golden axe. "Is this your axe?" asked Mercury of the woodsman. "No," answered the honest woodsman, "that is not my axe." Mercury laid the golden axe on the bank and sprang back into the pool. This time he brought back an axe of silver. But the woodsman declared again that his axe was just an ordinary one, with a wooden handle. Mercury dived down for a third time, and when he came back up again, he had the very axe that had been lost. The poor woodsman was very glad that his axe had been found, and could not thank the kind god enough. Mercury was greatly pleased with the woodsman's honesty. "I admire your honesty," he said, "and as a reward you shall have all 3 axes, the gold and the silver, as well as your own." The happy woodsman returned to his home with his treasures, and soon the story of his good fortune was known to everyone in the village. Now there were several woodsmen in the village who believed they could easily win the same good fortune. They hurried out into the woods, one here, one there, and hiding their axes in the bushes, pretending they had lost them. Then they wept and wailed and called on Mercury to help. And indeed, Mercury did appear, first to this one, then to that. To each one he showed an axe of gold, and each one eagerly claimed it to be the one they had lost. But Mercury did not give them the golden axe. Oh no! He instead gave them each a hard whack over the head with it and sent them home. And when they returned the next day to look for their own axes, they were nowhere to be found. The moral of this story is, honesty is the best policy. The Frog and the Mouse. A young mouse in search of adventure was running along the bank of a pond where lived a frog. When the frog saw the mouse, he swam to the bank and croaked, "Won't you pay me a visit? I can promise you a good time if you do." The mouse didn't need much coaxing, for he was very anxious to see the world and everything in it. But though he could swim a little, he did not dare risk going into the pond without some help. The frog had a plan. He tied the mouse's leg to his own with a tough reed. Excuse me. Then into the pond he jumped, dragging his foolish companion with him. The mouse soon had enough of it and wanted to return to shore. But the treacherous frog had other plans. He pulled the mouse down under the water and drowned him. But before he could untie the reed that bound him to the dead mouse, a hawk came sailing over the pond. Seeing the body of the mouse floating on the water, the hawk swooped down and seized the mouse and carried it off, with the frog dangling from its leg. Thus, at one swoop, he had caught both meat and fish for his dinner. The moral of this story: those who seek to harm others often come to harm themselves through their own deceit. The Fox and the Crab. A crab one day grew disgusted with the sands in which he lived. He decided to take a stroll into the meadow not far inland. There he would find better fare than briny water and sand mites. So off he crawled into the meadow, but there a hungry fox spied him, and in a twinkling ate him up, both shell and claw. The moral of this story is, be content with your lot. The next story is The Serpent and the Eagle. A serpent had succeeded in surprising an eagle and wrapped himself around the eagle's neck. The eagle could not reach the serpent, neither with beak nor claws. Far into the sky he soared, trying to shake off his enemy, but the serpent's hold only tightened, and slowly the eagle sank back to earth, gasping for breath. A countryman chanced to see the unequal combat. In pity for the noble eagle, he rushed up and soon had loosened the coiling serpent and freed the eagle. The serpent was furious. He had no chance to bite the watchful countryman. Instead, he struck at the drinking horn hanging from the countryman's belt and let into it fly the poison of its fangs. The countryman now went on towards home. Becoming very thirsty on the way, he filled his horn at a spring and was about to drink. There was a sudden rush of great wings. Sweeping down, the eagle seized the poisoned horn from out of his savior's hands and flew away with it to hide it where it could never be found. The moral of this story is, an act of kindness is well repaid. The Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. A certain wolf could not get enough to eat because of the watchfulness of the shepherds. But one night he found a sheepskin that had been cast aside and forgotten. The next day, dressed in the skin, the wolf strolled into the pasture with the sheep. Soon a little lamb was following him about and was quickly led away to slaughter. That evening the wolf entered the fold with the flock. But it happened that the shepherd took a fancy for mutton broth that very evening, and, picking up a knife, went into the fold. There the first he laid hands on and killed was the wolf. The moral of this story is, the evildoer often comes to harm through his own deceit. The Bull and the Goat. A bull once escaped from a lion by entering a cave which the goatherds used to house their flocks in stormy weather and at night. It happened that one of the goats had been left behind, and the bull had no sooner got inside than this goat lowered his head and made a rush at him, butting him with his horns. As the lion was still prowling outside the entrance to the cave, the bull had to submit to the insult. "Do not think," he said, "that I submit to your cowardly treatment because I am afraid of you. When that lion leaves, I'll teach you a lesson you won't forget." The moral of this story is, it is wicked to take advantage of another's distress. The Eagle and the Beetle. A beetle once begged the eagle to spare a hare which had run into her for protection. But the eagle pounced on her prey, the sweep of her great wings tumbling the beetle a dozen feet away. Furious at the disrespect shown her, the beetle flew to the eagle's nest and rolled out the eggs. Not one did she spare. The eagle's grief and anger knew no bounds. But who had done this cruel deed she did not know. The next year the eagle built her nest far up in a mountain crag, but the beetle found it and again destroyed the eggs. In despair, the eagle now implored great Jupiter to let her place her eggs in his lap. There none would dare harm them. But the beetle buzzed about Jupiter's head and made him rise to drive her away, and the eggs rolled from his lap. Now the beetle told the reason for her action, and Jupiter had to acknowledge the justice of her cause. And they say that ever after, while the eagle's eggs lie in the nest in spring, the beetle still sleeps in the ground, for so Jupiter commanded. The moral of this story is, even the weakest may find means to avenge a wrong. The Old Lion and the Fox. An old lion whose teeth and claws were so worn that it was not so easy for him to get food as in his younger days pretended that he was sick. He took care to let all his neighbors know about it, and then lay down in his cave to wait for visitors. And then, when they came to offer him their sympathy, he ate them up one by one. The fox came too, but he was very cautious about it. Standing at a safe distance from the cave, he inquired politely after the lion's health. The lion replied that he was very ill indeed, and asked the lion to step in for a moment, but Master Fox was very wisely stayed outside, thanking the lion very kindly for the invitation. "I should be glad to do as you asked," he added, "but I have noticed that there are many footprints leading into your cave, and none coming out. Pray tell me, how do your visitors find their way out again?" The moral of this story is, take warning from the misfortune of others. The Man and the Lion. A lion and a man chanced to travel in company through the forest. They soon began to quarrel, for each of them boasted that he and his kind were far superior to the other, both in strength and mind. Now they reached a clearing in the forest where there stood a statue. It was a representation of Hercules in the act of tearing the jaws of the Nemean lion. "See," said the man, "how strong we are. The king of beasts is like wax in our hands." "Ho!" laughed the lion. "A man made that statue. It would have been quite a different scene if a lion had made it." The moral of this story is, it all depends on the point of view and who tells the story. The Ass and the Lapdog. There was once an ass whose master also owned a lapdog. This dog was a favorite and received many a pat and kind word from his master, as well as choice bits from his plate. Every day the dog would run to meet the master, frisking playfully about and leaping up to lick his hands and face. All this the ass saw with much discontent. Though he was very well fed, he had much work to do. Besides, the master hardly ever took notice of him. Now the jealous ass got it into his silly head that all he had to do to win his master's favor was to act like the dog. So one day he left his stable and clattered eagerly into the house. Finding the master seated at the dinner table, he kicked up his heels and with a loud bray pranced giddily about the table, upsetting it as he did. Then he planted his forehead on his master's knees and rolled about his tongue to lick the master's face, as he had seen the dog do. But the weight upset the chair, and the ass and man rolled over together in the pile of broken dishes from the table. The master was much alarmed at the strange behavior of the ass, and calling for help soon attracted the attention of the servants. When they saw the danger the master was in from the clumsy beast, they set upon the ass and drove him with kicks and blows back to the stable. There they left him to mourn the foolishness that had brought him nothing but a sound beating. The moral of this story is, behavior that is regarded as agreeable in one is very rude and impertinent in another. Do not try to gain favor by acting in a way that is contrary to your own nature and character. This next story is called The Milkmaid and Her Pail. A milkmaid had been out to milk the cows and was returning from the field with the shining milk pail balanced nicely on her head. As she walked along, her pretty head was busy with plans for the days to come. "This good rich milk," she mused, "will give me plenty of cream to churn. The butter I will take to market, and with the money I get for it, I will buy a lot of eggs for hatching. How nice it will be when they are all hatched and the yard is full of fine young chicks. Then when May Day comes I will sell them, and with the money I'll buy a lovely new dress to wear to the fair. All the young men will look at me. They will come and try to make love to me, but I shall very quickly send them about their business." As she thought of how she would settle that matter, she tossed her head scornfully, and down fell the pail of milk to the ground, and all the milk flowed out, and with it vanished butter and eggs and chicks and a new dress and all the milkmaid's pride. The moral of this story is, do not count your chickens before they are hatched. The Wolf and the Shepherd. A wolf lurking near the shepherd's hut saw the shepherd and his family feasting on a roasted lamb. "Aha," he muttered, what great shouting and running about there would have been, had they caught me at just the very thing they are doing with so much enjoyment. The moral of this story is, men often condemn others for what they see no wrong in doing themselves. This next story is called The Goatherd and the Goat. A goat strayed away from the flock, tempted by a patch of clover. The goatherd tried to call it back, but in vain. It would not obey him. Then he picked up a stone and threw it, breaking the goat's horn. The goatherd was frightened. "Do not tell the master," he begged the goat. "No," said the goat, "that broken horn can speak for itself." The moral of this story is, wicked deeds will not stay hid. The Miser. A miser had buried his gold in a secret place in his garden. Every day he went to the spot, dug up the treasure, and counted it piece by piece to make sure it was all there. He made so many trips that a thief who had been observing him guessed that it was what the miser had hidden, and one night quietly dug up the treasure and made off with it. When the miser discovered his loss, he was overcome with grief and despair. He groaned and tore at his hair. A passerby heard his cries and asked what had happened. "My gold, oh my gold," cried the miser wildly. "Somebody has robbed me." "Your gold? There in that hole? Why did you put it there? Why did you not keep it in the house where you could easily get it when you had to buy things?" "Buy?" screamed the miser angrily. "Why, I never touched the gold. I couldn't think of spending any of it." The stranger picked a large stone and threw it into the hole. "If that is the case," he said, "cover up that stone. It is worth just as much as the treasure you had lost." The moral of this story is, a possession is worth no more than the use we make of it. The Wolf and the House Dog. There was once a wolf who got very little to eat because the dogs of the village were so wide awake and watchful. He was really nothing but skin and bones, and it made him very downhearted to think of it. One night this wolf happened to fall in with a fine fat house dog who had wandered a little too far from home. The wolf would have gladly eaten him then and there, but the house dog looked strong enough to leave his marks should he try it. So the wolf spoke very humbly to the dog, complimenting him on his fine appearance. "You can be as well fed as I am if you want to," replied the dog. "Leave the woods. There you live miserably. Why, you have to fight hard for every bite you get. Follow my example, and you will get along beautifully." "What must I do?" asked the wolf. "Hardly anything," answered the house dog. "Chase people who carry canes, bark at beggars, and fawn on the people of the house. In return, you will get tidbits of every kind, chicken bones, choice pieces of meat, sugar, cake, and much more besides, not to speak of kind words and caresses." The wolf had such a beautiful vision of his coming happiness that he almost wept. But just then he noticed that the hair on the dog's neck was worn and the skin was chafed. "What's that on your neck?" "Nothing at all," replied the dog. "What? Nothing? Oh, just a trifle. But please tell me. Perhaps you see the mark of the collar of which my chain is fastened." "What? A chain?" cried the wolf. "Don't you go anywhere you please?" "Not always, but what's the difference?" replied the dog. "All the difference in the world. I don't care a rap for your feast, and I wouldn't take all the tender young lambs in the world at that price." And away the wolf ran into the woods. The moral of this story is there is nothing worth so much as liberty. The Fox and the Hedgehog. A fox swimming across a river was barely able to reach the bank, where he laid bruised and exhausted from his struggle with the swift current. Soon a swarm of blood-sucking flies settled on him, but he lay quietly, still too weak to run away from them. A hedgehog happened by. "Let me drive the flies away," he said kindly. "No, no," exclaimed the fox, "do not disturb them. They have taken all they can hold. If you drive them away, another greedy swarm will come and take the little blood I have left." The moral of that story is, better to bear the lesser evil than to risk a greater in removing it.